My name is Michael McAfee. I'm the president and CEO of PolicyLink. I'm based in Oakland, California. And it's good to be with you today. It's good to be where it's cold as hell. I came out of the airport last night and I forgot what this was like. I've lost my cold weather mojo. It's gone. It's really good to be in person. I've been on Zoom over the last couple of years doing this. But I'm glad to be with you and to feel your energy. But I'm also glad to be here because I think it is important for us to build off the legacy of others, the voice, wisdom, and experience of others. And in an exchange earlier with Meta, I think you said something, ma'am, that I thought was really important. This is indigenous wisdom. It is indigenous wisdom. It is systems wisdom. It is all the above, and we should always make those connections and honor it. But there's something about indigenous wisdom that I think is important as I start talking to you today about systems and awareness and equity that I think is really important. Indigenous wisdom is important to center because we've not often seen it. We've often thought of it as less than. And that's what Meta was talking about, getting beyond that. What we need to solve our problems in many ways has already been in our living system. We've chosen not to acknowledge it. And before we get to the systems work, I want you to think about acknowledgement from your own personal perspective. Because I show up that way in the world, and I don't think you can do good systems work if you only look to the external. It is so easy to offer the critique. It is so easy to talk in the third person and to skip over that many of us are already authorized to enact a different possibility every day. I think about my own job. I can do what the hell I want to do. It's very little that I have to ask permission from my board from, so why would I act helpless at PolicyLink? So when it comes to systems change at PolicyLink, I'm already authorized. I already have the responsibility and the agency to do something. Now the question is, do I have the consciousness and the heart and the will and the commitment? And so I want you to think about compassionate systems as a consciousness-raising endeavor. We need technical skill. We also need adaptive skill. And I think compassionate systems is a little bit of both of those. And I want you to think about how do you develop both of those muscles. The technical capability to do this deep work, that's the mechanics of when Peter and Meta are breaking this down, the mechanics, the tools that you have to do it. But the adaptive is a muscle that is really underdeveloped in the States. And I want you to think about it. I want you to think about what are you trying to love into being? That's the leadership stance that I take when I think about compassionate systems. What am I trying to love into being? And I really want you to think about your leadership stance. See, it's hard to lead when you actually don't have a point of view about leadership. You have a lot of technical book knowledge about leadership. I want you to think about your leadership stance. When I show up to work at PolicyLink and in the field that I'm in, I'm showing up asking myself, how do I become the manifestation of love that is needed in the world, even with all of my flaws? It's a very different way to show up. I could show up and say, I want to raise $300 million. I could say, I want to get a bill passed. Those things are all important. But the bigger thing that keeps me humbled and centered is struggling every day to be the manifestation of love, because I'm not going to master that in this life. I'm just not. But it's also important because it puts me in the right mindset to do the thing that is hard for me to do, which is to collaborate, because it drives me crazy. But you can't be compassionate if you can't do what the first sentence in the Equity Manifesto asked us to do. And you heard it in the mandala. You saw it in the mandala. First sentence in the Equity Manifesto says, it begins by joining. That's that relational component. We have to choose to want to be in relationship with each other. We have to choose to want to design a world that is just and fair for everyone. We have to call what we want our systems to be. Do we want them to be systems of oppression? Do we want them to be systems of liberation? What do we want them to be? How many of us have ever stopped and said, what do we want the system that we're building, that we're participating in to be? See, I think before you can talk about what the nation ought to be and all those things, I think you need to call it in your own org. Because when you call it in your own org, that's where the mastery happens. You want to learn how to do equity work and all that stuff, start trying to practice it. You know, Policy Link looks like the United Nations, 90 people coming together. It's not kumbaya all the time. You bring all that diverse energy together, it requires a set of skills to know how to get it to work together in harmony and in conflict, quite frankly. But there's something that we've called, and that is that we're going to have a loving and accountable culture. Doesn't mean you won't get fired at Policy Link, but it does mean there is a way you will get fired that acknowledges your humanity. The work won't be held hostage to you not performing. But we can be loving with you coming in, and we can be loving if you have to go out in a way that one would consider not positive. Love looks like my compensation. It's never more than 5 times the lowest paid person's. It's a choice. It looks like you get unlimited leave. It looks like we pay 100% of your benefits. It looks like we close the office down 3 times a year for a week just so everybody can restore without having to be stressed about being in the office. It looks like I'm not making you come back to the office because I want to work with adults. You know when you need to travel, you know when you need to be in the office, you know when you need to be in a relationship with people. If I have to tell you those things, you're really at the wrong place. Compassion looks like figuring out how to do those things and sustain them. So I want you to begin to think about in your own organization, how does that compassionate systems thinking and practice begin to show up in the space? And it starts with me acknowledging that in my position as president and CEO, it is a powerful formal position, but it's probably one of the weakest positions as well. Because for the type of organization that I'm trying to build, the only skill that I have is one that John Gardner talked about in the 90s, and it's the ability to exercise non-jurisdictional leadership. I'm only as good as the value that I bring. I'm not going anywhere by trying to command people to do anything. That's the fallacy of working with adults. I'm not going to command people to do anything, nor do I really want to. Compassionate systems work for me means I'm creating a space for people to do their soul work. And I really do mean soul work. You want to get greatness out of people? Create the conditions for that. Ask your management team, what does it take for them to create the conditions for people to walk over the imaginary threshold every day and not leave 50% of themselves behind? Watch what happens. We don't have a management script for that. But that's our work. That's what I want to learn to do. I tell people, I meet with everybody that comes at Policy Link now because this is such a serious competency for me. I tell them, do not come if you do not want to do your soul work because you'll never work as hard as you need to. It's a demanding place. And it's going to stay demanding. But the only way you can survive there is because there's something in you that you're trying to love into being. You see the difference? I can give you a technical job description. You'll never make it if that's all you can do at Policy Link. Because I want something more. And the reason why I want something more is not to just hit some performance metrics. It's because when we think about the United States, 1 in 3 people are economically insecure. 100 million plus folks are struggling to make ends meet, living at 200% of the poverty line. 40 plus million of it is white. Folks, that is a design challenge. That just isn't a happenstance. That is a design flaw of this nation. It is the design flaw of a nation that never asks some fundamental research questions. What is the logical conclusion of a nation founded on stolen land, slave labor, and genocide? Does it mean that there are not great things also about this nation? We can hold both of those tensions. Fabulous things are a part of this nation. But if you start the foundation like that, never really apologize for it or reconcile it, what is the logical conclusion? The logical conclusion now is even the founders' progeny are struggling to make it in this system. And yet they don't realize that they think it's the other because that's what we teach. We don't teach the design of the nation to folks, honestly. So folks don't know it. They don't see it, even though it's hiding in plain sight every day. They think it's just the other. They believe in the fallacy of mobility. You look at Raj Chetty's data, his mobility data tells you the American dream is dead, folks. It says that the zip code you're born in is pretty much the zip code that you're going to be in. And if you're a person of color, especially a black person, even if you make it out of poverty and into the middle class, it's a 50% chance that your children will fall back into poverty. That's the mobility data, folks, for all the folks who love math and science. That's what the math and science says about the American dream. Think about that. The zip code that you're born in is still now a determinant of how well you do and how long you live in this nation. We're better than that. But we didn't just get here by happenstance. We got here because there is a different operating system in this nation. It's not compassionate systems. It should be. But that's our work for our generation, to create this as the operating system. The operating system in this nation is still a hierarchy of human value. Some of us are more important than others, and we design for that. Some of us deserve housing, some do not. Some deserve good jobs, some do not. Some deserve neighborhoods with parks, some do not. Some deserve to have good environmental resilience, some do not. Some deserve to have really good schools, some do not. And the problem now is that oppression has reached scale. Love to talk about scale and systems thinking. It's reached scale and it's jumped host. Now it infects us all. I laugh in California because California, its education system is a perfect example of structural racism and folks don't even know it. If you read The Color of Law, you will see that you have over 100 of school districts because folks didn't want to be educated next to people like me. And so now folks got these nice jobs in the city making $200,000 a year plus, and they're crying because if you have children, you have to make a choice. Can I afford private school or my rent or my mortgage? Because I can't have it all. And they can't have it all because of the sin of structural racism. In the 70s, we said we were going to get rid of, we were going to start busing and we were going to step away from public education. It was a public good that was no longer worthy for everyone, because now everyone included me. So we stepped away from it. The tax of stepping away from it is that folks who move to the Bay Area now can't prosper maximally because of that unresolved sin. They don't even know why they're struggling today. They don't even know of the decisions in the 70s and the 80s. You almost go to any city, you see it. School districts are like little bitty fiefdoms all over the city, all over the jurisdictions. But that's why. That's a system designed to oppress. From its origin story, folks. From its origin story, start asking about your system's origin story and tell me what you see. You know, it was fascinating to learn about how do frogs see. I've been reflecting on that because I wonder, how do we see? How do we see? How do we see systems? How do we see each other? Do we really see each other's humanity enough to act in service of the other? See, if we don't master these skills, it's useless to talk about them somewhere else. It's useless to write papers about them. It's useless to do all that. This is a practice journey. Research has its place, but I don't fundamentally believe you can come up with new knowledge if you're not trying this out in the real world. You want to create the best, robust body of research here? Apply what you're learning here, folks. This is our generational work. And when I say generational work, what do I mean? To me, this transcends the discipline of education. This is nation-building work. And for me, nation-building work requires us to ask ourselves, what are new social competencies that all who live here should embody? This is a new social competency. This is a new social competency. Imagine if children were raised not fearing the other. Imagine if children were raised to think about the design of spaces for all. Imagine if children were raised with the noble concept of the all and knew what it meant for them to be in service of it. Not just some, not just their little clique of family, but that they were raised to think about being in service to all. Imagine if volunteerism had a whole new connotation besides charity, but it was a connotation of liberation. Imagine what would happen. We wouldn't just high-five that we're passing water bottles out in Flint, Michigan, and Jackson, Mississippi, while the pipes are still poisoning people. We would get about the business of passing a bond package that would fix the pipes and not put all the costs on the burden of the poorest people. That's what we would do. Imagine what this nation would look like if it could do that. That is the work of this body of people right now, to figure out how do we go back out into the world and begin to enact different possibilities from right where we sit. And some of you might be saying, yeah, man, but it's hard enough just to do my job. Do not underestimate your power, and do not give it away. More importantly, do not give it away by acting like you don't have it or giving it away to somebody else who won't use it right. We all are immensely powerful beings. But you've got to really get the self-doubt out of your head and begin to talk about that stuff and believe it. And I'll tell you why. You know, when I started my academic career, I didn't start to be an academic at all. I started to play football and run track and chase girls. That's how I started, because I had enough parents who knew enough to say, baby, get a good education. But I was still fearful of education because of the environment I grew up in, where my voice really wasn't respected. My thoughts really weren't respected. I was supposed to do things a particular way. I didn't like that way. And so I tried to hide my intelligence by acting out and playing around, playing games, or avoiding doing this work. But over time, I found my voice in that. But I also found my voice at PolicyLink. I'm finding my voice in the halls of Congress and philanthropy and business, all sorts of places. And I can tell you, imagine a shop 23 years ago. At the time, probably starting out with a $5 million budget over 5 years. Never really had more than 30 people. Never had a budget more than 12 million, putting the concept of racial equity on the map. Now all three sectors have come to it. That's what Angela Glover Blackwell founded 23 years ago. Now we get to stand on her shoulders and take it to the next level. Think about that. Didn't take a lot of money. You know, when I'm always frustrated, one of my mentors said something to me. Now I don't even call him anymore because I know he's going to say it to me. He says, you know, Michael, remember Rosa Parks never said I'm not going to sit in the back of the bus unless I have a grant agreement. She's like, Michael, you got to remember, it wasn't money that made her do that. It wasn't, I'll wait till I have something else. And as much as that stings, it's true. Because now we are so comfortable that we think all the conditions have to be right for us to act. The condition is every cell in your body is right already. That is the ultimate condition. that your cells are activated to want to do this work. That's the ultimate condition. And think about how powerful your cells are. I want you to think about what you're loving into being. I'm trying to love into being, designing a world where that 100 million number is no more. Where when you work in this nation, you don't have to work 2 jobs and still can't afford to live in most zip codes in this country. Where you don't have to pay for private school because public education is a product that is good enough for everyone. That's the world that I want to design. Now, wanting to design that world in a world where we've gone a little too far because you're going to run up into folks who want a very different America. And there's nothing wrong with folks who want a very different America. That is their right. I don't begrudge them. I also don't have to demonize them. But I do not have to let them roll me. So when I say what is the manifestation of love for me that I'm struggling with, it is to not fight the way I was raised to fight, physically. It is to not have a heart that becomes jaded and hateful of that type of oppression. Because when you've experienced it, you know what it feels like. You do want to kick somebody's ass. But you got to keep remembering that love is far, far more profound. And in fact, folks who choose to oppress in this nation have already lost. Who would have thunk that the majority of the nation would become a nation of color? They would have sent our asses back to Africa if they knew that was going to happen. You see my point? Think about that. The very designers of this nation, if they had really played out the end game, they probably would have figured out when would they transport us back. But the genie's out the bottle now, folks. The genie's out the bottle. And to think about the gift of the oppressed getting to be the liberator. The oppressed getting to be the liberator. That's not a new story, that's a common story. That's a common story across religious orientations. That could be our story. But it's not just a story of the oppressed, it's a story for all of us to join in right now. The all is a powerful orientation, folks. The all is a powerful orientation because I can tell you, because this nation becomes a nation of color is no guarantee that it will be any better. If folks do not have the right heart and consciousness, the nation doesn't get better. If black and brown people cannot see the all, we do the same thing that's always happened, just different face. What's the point? What's the point? So that is why beginning by joining is so important. Seeing the all and working in the service of the all is so important because that is our job. That's the unfinished business. That is the invitation of our democracy. Every birth gets that invitation to continue to perfect our democracy to be what it needs to be. It should not be perfect. It should not be perfect. Our job is to continue to pursue perfection with it. So I want you to think about, how is your system a reflection of that? How's your system contributing to it? And the last thing I'll say is this so that we can have some time for conversation. Some of you all may be in systems where you're not in the right position and you have to move. You just got to accept that and move. You just got to accept it and move. You cannot hold your soul work hostage to a good government job, good pension. I know. I was at HUD for 11 years after getting fired in Kansas City for doing this work. And HUD was a place for me to try to heal and lick my wounds and getting over being afraid to be back out there in a world that really doesn't know how to deal with strong black men. It don't know how to deal with a lot of folks. Everybody's got their thing that this world doesn't know how to deal with. It is really hard to be a black man that has any type of aggression, energy that can be perceived as aggression and do this work. And I do not choose to be soft. And so as I walk through the world, there's sanctions for that. And so at HUD, it was kind of like, okay, I heard my mom and dad, get that good government job. Now I got it, right? Now I know I can be secure. But 7, 8 years in, I'm making the money I want to make, but I'm not happy because my soul can do more, folks. And I had gotten into a fellowship with the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and I got this Children and Families Fellowship. And towards the end of it, I had started looking around, and a woman named Donna Stark at Casey said, Michael, there's this job opening at this place called Policy Link, and I think you'd be great for it. So when you're in New York, why don't you go and interview? So I said, okay. So I learned never to let people interview me anymore. So when I talked to this recruiter, I told her all this crazy shit I would do. And she took like 6 pages of notes. So I went home and told my wife, I said, man, that didn't work. She was excited. So they called me out to Policy Link, and so I still learned never let people interview me. So I brought all my strategy documents in. Said, if you hire me now, this is the shit I'm gonna do. And they just sat there stoically and shook their heads, and they invited me back. And I ultimately got the job. But what really got me over getting that job was my wife. I am really OCD about stuff being in its place. And one day, Eckhart Tolle's Purpose of Now book was out of place. And I picked it up to move it, and my mother had given her some pictures of me, say in my radical years, and it fell out, the newspaper clipping fell out. And here's me looking at my younger self on the floor, talking all this amazing radical stuff that young people talk. And I'm thinking to myself, where did that person go? It's like, wow, where did that person go? And I'm thinking, how can I stay with my wife if I know that this part of me is going to be dead? And that I'm choosing now, making a conscious choice to die in this cubicle at HUD. I'm making a conscious choice to die in this cubicle at HUD. Because once I make that choice, I'm going to be miserable. So I'm going to be a miserable husband. I'm going to be a miserable friend. I'm going to be a miserable father. I'm going to be a miserable everything, blaming everybody else for a choice that I made. So what I'm asking you to do, folks, is to call it. I left HUD and my income has probably gone up 10 times and I ain't even asked for that. But my impact has probably gone up 100-fold. I did ask for that. The community of people that I get to be in relationship to do this work has gone up 1,000-fold. Simply by choosing to join in a different way. Simply by choosing to join a different way. And so much of that systems work, so much of that iceberg work, we got to do on ourselves, because there's so much of us right now that is living in fear, regret, guilt, and it's time to let it go. You can't really step into your destiny of being that compassionate leader knowing that you've made choices to dim your light. You can play around the edges of it, but you'll never really fully be able to actualize what I would call the Creator's gifts that are uniquely yours. That's what you hear me talking about now. That's what this nation needs. That nation needs leaders who can stand in the storm and just be steady. Not have to fight, not have to call names, but can be steady, showing the way forward. Policy Link is a way forward. I'm recruiting folks that would usually go to the best think tanks in DC because of what we've created. Now, part of me used to say to myself, damn, Michael, well, you know, it's not a white institution. Folks may not like it. You know, you're a black leader. Maybe they don't want to come over there and work for you. I used to tell myself all that shit. And then I started seeing folks saying, well, you know, I had an offer over at the Urban Institute. Oh, I had an offer at the Brookings, but I'm coming here. And I'd say, damn, Michael, why were you telling yourself that shit? You're building the thing that is compassionate, and yet you're afraid to even own it yourself. Folks, this is the work we just got to do on ourselves forever. The invitation here is that compassionate systems is just another framework if you let it be that. Or it could be something quite transformative. And I'm asking you to think about, how do you internalize it enough not where you're selling compassionate systems and running around telling everybody the elements of it, but that you're embodying the elements and how you move through the world and how you lead and with the results that you bring to life. That's the ultimate invitation. And how you do it is your business. We're not going to all do it the same way. We're all going to put our little flair and stamp on it. And that's the brilliance of the frame. So in this moment, don't leave this conference thinking that this is something absent of the person. You. Because in that activation of the person, we're going to find the best next generation of the research to do. We're going to find the next best generation of the practice to do. And in all of us joining together, struggling through this together, we're going to ultimately create a world where everybody can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. That's always been the vision of equity, justice and fairness for every single one. That's our charge. I can't think of a better way to spend your time on this earth until you take your last breath. That's what I'm going to do till I take my last breath. That keeps this place from being like purgatory. Seriously, folks, I get up every morning with a powerful gift to know that my life has meaning, it has purpose, and that whether I'm in PolicyLink or I get fired from PolicyLink, it is indomitable. You cannot stop it now. The job is an HR function. Holding the mantle of compassionate systems practice is a way of being that doesn't know job title. So regardless of what your title is in the system that you're in, think about showing up this way as fully empowered atoms that are all firing in service of that magnificent obsession of the all. And watch what you unleash across the world. Thank you. What's on your mind? Thank you. What's on your mind? Yeah, take a second and just write down some of your reflections. Let me know when you think we should have them come back, man. Thank you. All right. Oops. Pick it up. Let's go. Go. That's all right, but
is there anything I can be up here with you?
yes, ma'am. Let's take 2 more minutes to journal, and then I'll come to you, ma'am. And Meta, we should be out of here. What time? Just to make sure I'm on track. 12:15? Okay.
We have until 12:30.
Okay, I'll stop around 12:15. Okay,
Yeah, so
perfect.
don't stop.
Okay. Take 1 more minute. As you're finishing up, I'll go ahead and take your question, ma'am.
Thank you. Not unlike you, even though I'm not a black male, my energy is constantly being mistaken for aggression. So I hope, since you have the same kind of feeling, you don't take my question as aggressive, even though it's completely politically incorrect.
Yes, that's all right.
You mentioned that this country is built on slavery, land theft, and something else. I forgot what it was. I'm sorry? Genocide. Yeah, genocide. I'm just wondering why the country that is built on land theft, slavery, and genocide is the best country in the world.
Well, it depends on how you define best. You know, and I'm not offering a value judgment to it. What I'm simply asking us all to consider is our origin story and what is the logical conclusion of an origin story. Imagine if your partner sexually abused your children. What would be the origin story that would play out for years to come in those kids? Some of them might grow up and be doctors and lawyers. Doesn't mean they're not pain and trauma. And this is often the problem when it comes to systems work, is that everybody holds a different perspective of it. That's why I said we can hold the tension of both. But often when we're holding the tension of both, we're holding our experience and not seeing everybody else's. I was with a group of CEOs in Silicon Valley a couple of days ago, and they were talking about the wonders of America and how great it is. It is, for you, from where you sit. But I bet you couldn't survive 6 months in my seat. From them it is. For me, it's good for me too. Donald Trump's tax cuts were great for me too. But I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about a real population. And what I often say to folks is, it's fascinating when you're doing systems work how a person, I'm not talking about you now, I'm showing you how systems work. They will skip over the population and go to specific things. That's their worldview, and that's right, that's okay. But I'm actually talking about a body of humanity. That's why I said you're right, and this is the complexity of America. It is really good. But if you look at the data, there's deep fractures in what was a noble idea. And the noble idea could get away with that when it was homogeneous and small. We never did the research to say what would be the logical conclusion, so we didn't have the data points. But if you look at why civilizations fail, we got plenty of research on that. So now start looking at the research around why great nations fail and look at America right now. You go to most other cities, our infrastructure lags far behind other countries, even countries that we turn our nose up at. Our education system lags far behind other places, even places we turn our nose up at. Part of the problem in America is many of us don't travel. Because you travel to other places, you realize this shit ain't all that. There's an arrogance that comes with that orientation that confounds us. And it's hard for people to hear if that's the narrative you've been raised with. It's hard for all of us. I tell my own staff, I'm like, we've got a big problem in America right now, because my staff will sometimes say, we got to get rid of capitalism. Say, oh, that sounds great, but to your point, capitalism has really lifted a lot of people out of poverty. It's far more nuanced than that. Rap music isn't ode to capitalism. So your own folks are buying into a system that also oppresses. This is why systems thinking is so important, because it's not an easy answer. It is far more complicated now. What I'm trying to get people to think about in my own practice is, we can hold it all. I'm trying to optimize America. I know it's done good things. I'm not trying to deny that. What I'm saying now is, how can it do it for everyone? How can it do it for everyone? How can white folks not have to slip back to where black and brown people are before we wake up? Because that's what you see happening now in this country. Black and brown folks' outcomes. You look at a lot of white male outcomes, you read book Dying of Whiteness. In many instances, white male outcomes, health outcomes, are worse than black males. So you've passed the canary in the coal mine. Think about that. They're called the diseases of despair. So how in the wealthiest country in the nation are white males floundering on health outcomes now? When we would say they got everything they need. That's not true. They don't. And they're floundering because we often haven't seen their humanity, because we can easily tell the story, the narrative of the white male in America, and you dehumanize a whole group of people, not understanding that they need our help and support and joining with as well. So I think when you do systems work, you're going to come across a lot of paradoxes. And that's why I say to folks, even in my own shop, I'm not trying to win an ideological argument. I'm trying to have a results-based outcome. So after everybody finishes talking, and I say this even when I go to Congress, that 100 million number still stands. It's going to be waiting for you whether you deal with it today or 50 years from now, it'll just be bigger. And that's what I want you to think about. When you're compassionate, people can hold whatever they believe. I don't care. I'm not trying to change someone's belief system. I'm trying to say, do you want to work in service of that 100 million number? Because I'll tell you what it looks like in the Bay. In the Bay, ask CVS and Walgreens what it looks like. They're moving all their stores out of downtown. Ask the businesses who are downtown. We don't even have comparatively speaking, we don't even have a large homelessness population, and the folks in San Francisco can't even take it. They scared. Don't even want to drive their car to dinner. I don't even want to drive my car because it's going to get broken into. Think about how homogenous San Francisco is. Think about how small it is landmass-wise compared to other cities. Think about the scale of the city. Small city compared to other cities. And it can't even handle what it created. The most beautiful expression of what I think racial oppression. I can't tell you another city with a smile and under the banner of liberalism has pushed all black and brown people out of the city, and yet turns its nose up at the South. And yet it's afraid to walk down its own streets. Think about that. Going through the floods and things now. One of the wealthiest states in the country. Ask the folks what it looks like when you don't take care of the environment. You see whole cities burn. Ask folks now who can't even buy homeowners insurance because they can't afford it. Practical example, I live in the hills. I live in a condo association, the homeowners association. Our property owners the association's insurance went from $100,000 to $2 million overnight. We don't even live in a fire zone. See, this becomes real. This is the greatest country in the nation now. Most people, Louisiana is begging insurers to stay in Louisiana to insure homes. My wife works for Nuveen Investments. They're already talking about when they're going to move out of insuring and underwriting deals in Florida. The fallacy of capitalism, it's great until it doesn't work for your ass. It's great until it doesn't work for you, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, but what about we? I wish that a politician would stand up one day and say to folks, all those folks who thought rugged individualism was the order, fix your own damn house. Don't take $1 of flood money. Don't take $1 of FEMA assistance. Don't ask for an FHA loan. Don't ask for a government-backed loan. Fix your own shit. Right? Think about Florida right now. Imagine what would happen if government said, all you folks who have the political orientation that says government does too much. What would happen to Florida right now? Where are all those people at now in Florida? Trump supporters, conservatives fiscally, who would otherwise say, if it looked like a different group of people, it was your responsibility to have homeowners insurance, and you should have paid the extra for flood insurance and hurricane insurance, and just because you were ignorant and didn't do it, we shouldn't have to pay. Tell all those folks who just got hit by that hurricane that. This is why the all is so important, because I only care about we when I am in trouble. And that's the problem of our country right now. I only care about we when I'm in trouble. Until then, it doesn't really matter what I do. And we're better than that, folks. That's not sustainable. What we're trying to do is create sustainable systems that works for folks. And I think your question is a really good one. America is a phenomenal country. We can own that too. We have to own that. And as John Gardner would also call us to be, we also have to be a loving critic of every system that we're in. because every system still has some perfection to do. And that's what we're talking about. That's it. So imagine the power if we could get out of ideological fights with each other and just simply own that every system has some perfecting that can be done in service of some group or someone. And that's the position that I try to hold. Because not being in a loving posture means I just fight ideologically to no end, not realizing that we both have already lost, no matter what side of the political spectrum that you're on. And this is the conundrum of a large part of our nation right now, is it wants to hold the greatness of the nation, but not also areas where it can improve. And I think that reconciliation is where we'll even be greater. So that's what I'm trying to get us to hold in this greater complexity. And sadly, our generation, we have to hold all that complexity now. I can't just hold racial equity. I got to hold gender equity. I got to hold all sorts of sexual identities. I got to hold economic equity. I got to hold climate equity. I've got to hold it all now. That's the work before us. So that's how I would answer it, ma'am, is that it is a great nation, you're right, and there's a lot of folks who love to come over to this nation because they realize the opportunities. I see this conundrum. You're raising a powerful conundrum when we think about systems change. It is the dominant narrative. And the dominant narrative is this is the great country. And you think about even folks that are black like me who come over here that are not from here, this is the greatest country on the planet Earth to them. You better have a bridging narrative to help them understand, because just telling them that that ain't true, what they believe, is not going to get you there. So this gets us into some of that deeper systems work around what is the cumulative stories that we're telling that would allow us to see all and continue to identify what's the work for us to do at this state of our evolution. Is that helpful, ma'am?
I'm just curious, who is there to decide what's just or equitable? Because I'm sure what you think is just and equitable is not what I think is just and equitable. So how do we resolve that disagreement?
Again, I'm not philosophizing. There's 100 million, well, how I would answer that question practically, there's 100 million people who can't afford to live in this country. You ask them, they'll tell you, I ain't asking for much. I'm just asking, can I afford to work and have a home? To me, that's just and fair. I'm not trying to overlay my value on it. This is going back to the question of indigenous wisdom. If you talk to people in places, they will tell you what they need. That is the ultimate answer. I don't have to philosophize about it. I just have to, but our problem is when they tell us, like they've been telling us for years, we don't listen. Those of us who go get the highfalutin degrees and get the amazing positions, we think we know it all. We go to conferences like this and other places and we talk amongst ourselves and we even get more heady, and then we go and we don't do the fundamental thing that would have made us brilliant, which is to listen and act in service of what people need. And so what I say to folks is, and I really do mean it, I'm not debating anybody. I'm not going to spend my life arguing down a rabbit hole. I'm going to spend my life trying to get results for everybody. Everybody has to decide what their cross is to bear. But what I can tell you going on in this country, there are folks who are trying to decide what just and fair looks like. A whole part of the Republican Party tries to make me stand in line with my mother for 8 hours to vote. That's not just and fair. They take polling place, early voting places away, so we can't vote. That's not just and fair. So what I often say to people is, to people who ask me those questions, I say, go tell me the people who are showing you what the opposite of that looks like, and tell me what happens there. And you find rarely that people will have a response to that, right? People who took away women's reproductive rights in this country, they put a marker down for justice and fairness. The Missouri legislature, who told women how they must dress in 2003, put a marker down for justice and fairness. See my point?
That came up in the Missouri General Assembly last week.
Yes.
About how women in the Missouri General Assembly that are elected representatives should be dressing.
That's right.
last week.
Last week. That's right.
Can I add to?
Well, look,
Mike.
and we'll come straight to you, man.
I go? Okay.
I'll come to you next.
First of all, thank you for the very inspiring talk. I'm from Israel, and we're doing all kinds of things there, and sometimes I feel I resonate with your messages, but I'm very worried about how do we deal with the fact that today most people's attention is going into these boxes where they're navigated into very polarized areas. And actually, if we look at, if we connect to Meta's talk, the ability to people to sense and to see the bigger picture and to see that they're actually looking through very narrow mental models. And I'm very worried about the fact that we can really talk about all these things and agree with them, but at the end there's brains that have attention systems. I'm a neuroscientist, so that's and they are if the attention systems are hijacked, and then they also are going into these very polarized places where you don't see the other, and you see a world. How do you deal with that? I'm very interested in how you try to deal with this, because maybe this is one of the things we want to change. We want to change the social media and the way they hijack our realities, to be able to be in this compassionate stance that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. I love these questions because now we're operationalizing exactly what I was saying. So where I start in my own org. Get rid of the provocative statements. Provocative statements aren't science, they're not evidence-based. They don't necessarily get us anywhere. I'm not interested in being a progressive think tank. I'm interested in being a results-based think tank. And there's a very big difference. Even though I'm in a progressive space and people would call policyLink progressive, I have no tolerance for it. See, because if you don't see these contradictions that I'm talking about, you can't create new knowledge. You're stuck. You see, you can after you give me the provocative statement, get rid of capitalism. You actually don't have a second act. You don't even know where to go with that statement. Because you're not willing to get rid of your 401k. You're not willing to get rid of the equity in your own home. You see how dumb it sounds? It's idiotic as hell because you don't even know what it means for your ass. So I want you to get real about capitalism, the nature and the logic of it, so you can tell me how to evolve it. So part of this, folks, this is a moment to be quiet. It's not really a moment where you got to say a lot of shit. One of the best things Angela Glover Blackwell told me when I took over, she said, Michael, you ain't got to say shit. It's true. I'm already in the seat. I don't have to say anything. And there's not a lot for me to say. It's a lot for me to do. It's a lot for me to do. So I don't get caught up in the political. That's why I don't go on MSNBC and all that stuff, because I could do that. But why do I want to go play in the echo chamber? It's not going to help anything. It keeps me busy, but that's not the work. So what I would ask you to do is to figure out how can you actually hear what folks. I have to spend a lot of time to hear folks who are continually harming me right now. Real talk. Those folks who try to deny me the right to vote, I have to interact with all the time. I still have to want to work for them and their families too. So I don't debate because debating to me is work avoidance. And there's a lot of work avoidance behaviors we can participate in. What I want to do is to slow the noise down in my own head and in my own space with the exercise like Meta did earlier today, and figure out how do I get up today and try to model it. Because what I find is if I model it and create the conditions for it, people come to it because they tired of that shit too. The problem is you just don't have places of respite you can go to. See, that's our system's work, to build the places of respite, the alternative. And I think progressives in many instances are finding that while one group of folks out there are creating another alternative that they want, we actually don't have solutions that will be sticky in the world at scale. We got more work to do. So for me, I want to think about, okay, if you say you want to get rid of cash bail, how do you deal with that when everybody's really fearful? Because that's a narrative that's in that chamber right now. You better have an answer. I want to figure that out. I think cash bail is really good, but in the political context, it's going to lose if you don't deal with how people really feel about these things. So part of what I'm saying is that iceberg, you better see all of it. You better sense what other people are feeling and hear all of it, feel all of it. But what I find more important is when I'm doing the work to build something that provides a real substantive alternative that people feel deeply, I don't have to say anything because they're buying it. They're buying it. And I think the biggest problem we have is while we have a lot of frameworks, we've not built the institutions that can hold what we're talking about. Because in so many instances, our institutions are full of shit. So even after, and imagine what it would be like for me to give a speech like this and then go back in my office is not what I'm talking about. You see my point? That's the tough work right now. As simple as it may be, that's where I start. I don't have an answer for everybody, but I start there. We don't put toxic stuff out all over social media, as another example. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna play, did you see what they said? And let's respond. Folks, you get to get up every day and make a choice about what you're gonna respond to and how you're gonna go through the world. And part of being still, and part of having an unshakable spirit is to know how to stand in a storm. Do you all really know how to stand in a storm and stay focused on what you're here to do? And what you hear me describing is my own sense-making around how I'm choosing to stand in a storm. I'm not gonna get in the echo chambers on MSNBC and talk radio. I'm not gonna go toe-to-toe with folks who like to be fiery on social media. The hell, that ain't even 10% of the population for real when you really look at the data, even though it has big impact. I'm choosing to build the thing that I'm talking about. And the last thing I'll say on this, and then we'll go to the other folks here, is this. I like the popular ecology literature that talks about environmental jolts. I know the conditions that we're in. So I'm planning how do I ride those waves of those environmental jolts. Every time there's a jolt, I'm figuring out how do we surf right on through it and get to a different place. So part of this work for us is to really have really deep resilience strategy for how do you move in a world where folks don't have to listen to you. Even the folks who are oppressed are buying this shit. That's the stuff that we got to sort through. And I don't find enough of us sorting through that because we're looking over there saying, but did you hear what he said? Do you see what they did? It's work avoidance. Stay focused over here and figure out how do you get 5 to 10 years ahead of the field and move the field to where you need them to be. That's the work of compassionate systems now. How do we get 5 to 10 years ahead of where the nation is at and begin to move the nation to this state of being? That's what I'm trying to figure out, and I don't have all the answers. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to speak, one, to the comment earlier. I had that belief previously. You know, I grew up a white male, and then I served for 10 years in the military and in the Marines. And not only do I think then that I'm in the best country, I certainly was in the best branch of service. Mm-hmm. And then I was involuntarily recalled to active duty in the Marine Corps during Operation Enduring Freedom. That was from a corporate job working with Walmart, went back to work with Walmart. And something fundamental shifted. It didn't necessarily require traveling to different places, but seeing different experiences and people. And so that shift caused me to quit and go work in K-12. And I went back and worked in a community near where I grew up. And over a 30-year time period, so in the school where I worked, the free and reduced lunch rate was 80%. 30 years ago, it was 65%. What happened? What changed? The demographics of the community in terms of the ethnicity of the individuals that lived in the area, certainly it became a little more diverse, but people were poorer. They had less money and less resources. And I, in terms of being what I thought was the greatest country in the world, then you look at, we're ranked 28th in measures of social well-being in 2020. That was down from 19 in in 2011. So we are going the wrong way in most measures of social well-being in this country. And I go back and I think about, again, talking about Walmart. You mentioned HVA, CVS, and those corner store drugstores. Listened to a report yesterday, and I saw a friend of mine post something that I worked at Walmart with about health and beauty aids. So these are the items, the personal care items, that they're being locked up now. What is that? That's not theft. It's people trying to access things that help them be clean. And we don't understand that the opposite of poverty isn't wealth, it is dignity. And then we try to get at the heart of that and say, to your point, like, how do we help people find dignity in their life, and how do we create systems to optimize that? And I like the last thing that you said, which I didn't have time to really think on, that is how do you do the move 5 years ahead to what the next thing is, and how do you operate? I live in rural Southwest Missouri, so from Missouri here. I live in rural Southwest Missouri, and what we're talking about in this room doesn't fly down there. And so you have to understand that iceberg, and then understand, if you're going to help navigate that change, how do you do so in a way that it is heard? And then it makes it more likely that you produce more desirable outcomes. And that's what I don't know, and would love some additional insight on.
Well, as we close and get ready to go to lunch, let me just say thank you to everyone who said something here, because you all are raising the right questions. Creating a world where people have dignity is key to this work. I was raised actually in Kansas City, Missouri, and I fished and hunted with my dad all over Missouri. And I was in the military for 8 years. And so I've seen all walks of life. And so when I stand up and talk to you, one of the reasons why I've suspended trying to sell my point of view on the world is because I can't join when I'm doing that. I'm not joining if I'm just trying to sell you on me and what I believe. I'm done before I even start. What I'm asking you all to think about is this. Regardless of what you think, is it really that hard to just work in service of other people? Because that's all, at the end of the day, that's just cut through the bullshit. Let's cut through all the frames. Let's cut through all the complexity. Is it really that hard for you to get, if you are as good as you think you are, if you think you're a good being, is it really that damn hard for you to get up and just say, I can work for everybody. I don't give a damn what you look like and what you think? That's where I'm at. You can be the most racist person in the world. What's new? I grew up around racist people. And most of them, you never know they're racist. I don't fear that. I don't have a problem with it. That's on them. So why do I need to fight them? Now, here's the thing I want you also to think about. I'm not trying to convince the racist of shit. I have a right to exist and to express my ideas as anybody else, and I'm going to stand on that. And when it comes to systems work, I want you to think about, how do you stand on your truth and stop watering it down for other people's comfort? Now, that's what I'm not going to do. Just as someone can call me all sorts of names and think all sorts of shit about me and tell me what they think my people ought to do, I give them that, and I want you to give me me. And so I lead by saying I can join with you, but I'm not going to walk into a room of anybody and try to sell something that I don't believe. I'm going to work on your behalf, and I'm going to tell you what I think is right, whether you like it or not. I'm not trying to be your friend. I'm trying to be your colleague in getting results. And I find when we do that, people come to you over time when they get to know you. And I've survived in this field because just like what's going to happen in this room, last thing I'll say is some of y'all go to lunch and be like, oh, bullshit what he said. We'll see each other enough times in the field together. And we're going to come to each other's perspectives, and we're going to come to know each other and know that there's a little bit of truth in everything that we've said. And there's more work to do in everything we've said. And if we continue to do that work together, we're going to end up being colleagues in this field. So all I tell you is make sure your flag is planted for the long term. I'm not going anywhere. This is where I'm going to be. And so I have nothing but time to do this work, and that's important. because it's going to be long, slow, steady work. But if you don't believe anything else, if you think all the frames are bullshit, if you think what I'm saying is bullshit, that's great. I'm going to leave you with the thing that I think is harder for your soul to ignore, like the orange elephant. The orange elephant I'm going to leave you with is, if you're so goddamn good and virtuous, why is it so hard for you to get up and love everybody? Why do you have to cause harm? If you're so fucking good, why do you have to cause harm? Why can't you see each other's humanity? Let your soul wrestle with that, because that's what all of our souls have to wrestle with. And we don't have to answer for anybody else. Every last one of us in this room, we're going to have to answer that question when we shut it down. Leave it at that.